so today we're going to wrap up the respiratory system and move on to begin talking about the digestive system. And by way of sort of introduction here then, we were looking at the respiratory portion last time. The respiratory portion includes what? Respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and then the alveolar sac, the bottom end, all right? And what makes a respiratory bronchiole? Yeah, so it's a smooth muscle tube, all right, but it has a couple of alveolar sacs poking off of it, or alveoli poking off of it, all right? And of course then we get into an alveolar duct, and it's just instead of being blind-ended, it's just a passageway, but it's got alveoli all over its sides. All right, and then eventually down into an alveolar sac. And all of these are covered with tiny capillaries that are branches off of the pulmonary artery and are going to eventually converge into the pulmonary vein, right? And so oxygen is going to be picked up and CO2 is going to be delivered into the alveolar space. All right, I think we referred to that process as external respiration before, meaning the exchange of gases occurring between the alveoli and the blood, all right, versus the exchange of gases at the tissue level between the capillaries and your tissues elsewhere in the body. Okay, we looked at a magnification view of the pulmonary surface and recognized the different cell types there. You had your type 1 alveolar cells, which are simple squamous cells. What's their embryonic origin? Ooh. Huh? What's their embryonic origin? Can you tell me that? Give it to me. Endoderm, with confidence. There you go. All right, endoderm. There you go. Endoderm. Okay, so that they are. And why are they endoderm anyway? I'll tell you why. All right, because where do you find endoderm? What's the classic location for endoderm? Lining of the gut. Lining of the gut. And guess what your lungs are? All right? In the very earliest fishes, your vertebrate ancestor, all right, the lungs form as an outpocketing of the gut. All right? That's what your lungs are. They're an outpocketing, a diverticulum of your digestive tract, which is why you have this point of intersection, isn't it? Right, where the airway and the digestive tract converge, because in fishes, the lung of the earliest fishes forms as an outpocketing of the gut. Hence, it is endoderm. All right, and you retain that same embryonic structure. All right, so alveolar type 1, simple squamous epithelium. That's the ones that form where gas exchange occurs. We said that we can talk about the respiratory barrier or the respiratory membrane, if you will, as what? The type 1 alveolar cell, the fused basement membranes of the alveolar cell with the adjacent endothelial cell of the capillaries, right, of the blood capillaries. So you see it here in this figure. All right. This is the alveolar space here, where my cursor is moving around. Right, there's the alveolar space, and then this is the type 1 alveolar cell, and then you've got basement membrane in here, and then there's your capillary endothelial cell. That's it. It's a little, very, very short distance, all right? I don't remember exactly how far that distance is, but I would guess it's on the order of 10 to 15 micrometers. Really short distance. Go ahead. That's right. Yeah. It's the alveolar wall and it's the capillary wall. And the capillary wall is the endothelial cell. And the fused basement membrane is with the... sits in between those two, right? That's what's in between the two. The alveolar sac, its basement membrane, all right? The capillary, its basement membrane, and that's it. Basement membrane. Basement. That's why we call it the fused basement membrane. All right? Okay? Good. Good. What about alveolar type 2 cells or septal cells? What's their function? They produce the detergent, the pulmonary surfactant, and if you were to describe the function of pulmonary surfactant, you would say it lowers the surface tension of water. And by doing so, what is it doing? It is making it easier to inflate the lung, or another way to say that is it's preventing the lung from collapsing as easily. All right? And you see the importance of their products. And the other cell type that's there are alveolar macrophages, which are what? They're also called dust cells, and we've said this before. They're fixed macrophages, which means they are monocyte-derived, all right, cells that have seeded themselves out and established permanent residence in the lung, just like osteoclasts and Kupffer cells in the liver and histiocytes in the connective tissue, all right? So just like a bunch of other cells that we've talked about already in the past that are monocyte-derived macrophages, okay? And of course their job is what? Any debris that accumulates down at the alveolar level, anything that got by the mucus, all right, they're going to be taken care of, okay? All right, so you've seen the parts of the system. You've seen the respiratory membrane, all right? And it would stand to reason then that if I simply open my mouth, gas exchange will take place. Right? There it is. Work? No. Why not? Because diffusion is only good over short distances. All right? And to maintain a high quality of air in the alveoli, for diffusion to occur into the blood, I need to ventilate. I need to move air in and out so that I provide fresh air, air that has a high concentration of oxygen and a low concentration of CO2 into the alveolar space. All right? So you ventilate the lungs in order to maintain the concentration gradients necessary for gas exchange at the level of the alveoli. Right? Again, gas exchange is diffusion between the alveolar space and the blood. But diffusion's only good over short distances. I can't expect oxygen out here to diffuse randomly all the way down into my lungs. I've got to take it there. And once I take it there, diffusion can take over. All right? And so we've got to ventilate, and this allows us to talk about the dynamic action of the respiratory system. If we look at the thoracic cavity then, all right? All right, there it is. Right? We have ribs here forming the chest wall. We've got the diaphragm here. Okay? And we've got the mediastinum here with the heart in it. Okay? And what do we call this space? The pleural cavity. And it is lined by a membrane of mesodermal origin. I think I heard somebody say that. All right? Right? It's lined by a membrane of mesodermal origin. There it is. Okay? Likewise here. All right? And this surface is called the parietal pleura. Okay? And this surface is called the visceral pleura. And what kind of membrane is this? What kind of membrane is the pleura? It's a serous membrane. Very good. It's a serous membrane. Does that make sense? It's a sealed cavity. We're secreting what? Slippery, protein-rich, non-viscous fluid, right? On the part of the serous membranes. All right? And our job is going to be then to create pressure changes, all right, as we try to ventilate the lungs, all right? As we try to ventilate the lungs, what we're going to try to do is change the pressure in this space, in the pleural cavity, relative to the pressure out here, the atmospheric pressure, all right? Atmospheric pressure. Okay? That's what you're going to do. And if I lower the pressure in here, any pressure change here is going to be reflected inside the lung as well. All right? So whether I'm talking about pressure in the pleural cavity, all right, I can say that's equal to pressure in the alveoli. All right, because any pressure change here is going to be reflected here. Okay? And all I'm going to do is this. For inflation, all right, I want P alveolar to be less than P atmospheric. All right? And for deflation, just the opposite. P alveolar greater than P atmospheric. Think about that a little bit. All right? If the pressure in here is less than the pressure out here, what's the atmosphere going to do? It's going to come pushing in, isn't it? All right? If the pressure here is greater than the pressure out here, it's going to go out, isn't it? All right? So all we've got to do is talk about how do you create those pressure differences. All right? And that's what the muscles of inspiration and the muscles of expiration do. All right? We're going to create pressure differences. All right? Now, the way we're going to create pressure differences is to create changes in volume. All right? And if you think about this box here, all right, with a bunch of gas molecules in it, all right, and if I take that box and expand it to that size, it's a sealed space. What happens to the distance between these particles? Right? They're more spread apart. All right? I've just increased the volume and lowered the pressure. All right? I've just increased the volume and lowered the pressure. If I increase the volume, it results in a proportional drop in pressure. All right? And that's how the system's going to work. I'm going to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity, or increase the volume of the pleural cavity. And in so doing, that pressure change is going to be reflected across the lung, and I'll have then a pressure differential between the alveoli and the atmosphere outside. Okay? Does everybody understand the idea of changing volume leading to a change in pressure? Everybody do you get that? Everybody, yes? Okay. All right, just in case. Have you ever taken a big syringe, all right, and you put your finger over the end of the syringe, no needle on it, just the barrel, all right? Put your finger over the end of that, all right, and pull back on the plunger, all right? And what do you feel at the tip of your finger? You feel the vacuum, right? Why? Because you've increased the volume, which is lowering the pressure in that space, all right? And air wants to suck in, doesn't it? All right? That's what you're doing. All right? And the way you're going to do it is by changing the volume of the thoracic cavity. So let's see how you accomplish that. All right? For inspiration, to inhale, you're going to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity. All right? Again, so that alveolar pressure is less than atmospheric pressure. All right? And you're going to do it by contracting a couple of muscles here. All right? We're going to contract the diaphragm. All right? So I'm going to drop the floor out of the system here. Remember the diaphragm, and this is always a little confusing. It's sort of not how you thought it was. When the diaphragm is relaxed, like all muscles, it is longer, right? And when it contracts, so here it is in its relaxed state, and when I contract it, it flattens out, all right? And so what happened to the floor of my thoracic cavity? It just dropped downward. What happened to the volume as a result? Okay. The other thing I'm going to do is, if this is my rib cage, here's my vertebral column. All right, let's not get too crazy with anatomy here. All right, here's my rib cage. Okay, good enough? Here's your sternum. This is anterior, This is posterior. This pen sucks. All right. There's a group of muscles here whose fibers run in this direction, called the external intercostal muscles. You have two layers of them. When you eat ribs, this is what you're eating. All right, the external intercostal muscles. All right, and these muscles, when they contract, pull up the rib cage. All right, they pull up on the rib cage, so the rib cage goes up. Here's the sternum now in its new position. The ribs are now oriented like this. All right, so the rib cage has come out, and it's also gotten wider. Okay, good. This is sometimes called the bucket handle effect. All right, here's a bucket. All right, and here's its handle. When I raise the handle of my bucket, what do you notice? It comes out, doesn't it? All right, it sweeps outward. All right, that's what your ribs are doing. And as they do so, you increase the volume. Good? You know? Go home and play with your bucket. All right? So all I'm saying is that when I rotate the ribs upwards, they also swing out away from the body. All right? Forward. All right? In a forward direction, so I increase the volume. So contraction of the external intercostals pulls up the ribs. You get an increase in volume. Contraction of the diaphragm drops the floor of the thoracic cavity down, increasing volume. There's also potentially the contribution of scalene muscles to elevate the first couple of ribs. We don't need to really worry about those. And if you really want to get this thing going, get the sternocleidomastoid in there, pulling up on the clavicle. All right, get your pec minor in there, pulling up on the upper ribs. All right, and you really get that full inflation, and your whole chest is expanding. All right, okay. And in doing so, by increasing then, by the contraction of these muscles, we increase the volume of this space. We lower the pressure here. At first, if I lower the pressure here, stay with me because this is the only sort of part that's not entirely intuitive. If I lower the pressure here relative to here, all right, then the lung is going to expand to fill in that space, isn't it? All right? And if the lung expands to fill that space, then now the pressure in here relative to atmospheric is lower and air is going to come in. All right? So one can think of it as a two-step process, right? Lower the pressure in the pleural cavity causes the lung to expand to fill that space. The expansion of the lung lowers the pressure in the alveolar space, which allows the atmosphere to push in. But these are really so tightly coupled that any change here is reflected here, and we don't have to think of it as sort of happening in a sequential set of steps. Okay? All right? Are we good? All right? So, inflation is an active process. Active meaning you had to engage muscles in order to make it happen. All right? Inflation is an active process. You had to use muscles. You had to expend energy. All right? 2 to 3% of the energy that you spend every day is spent on these muscles, causing these muscles to contract. All right? To allow you to draw air into your lungs. All right? So it's an active process. Now, expiration is a passive process, except when it's not. All right? That is, as you're sitting right now, you exhale simply by relaxing. And what does the diaphragm do when you relax it? What do we say? It's elastic, opposite to a rubber band, right? When it goes through elastic, it becomes longer, right, like all muscles. And so it goes back up. What happened to the volume? Decreased, all right? And likewise, where do your ribs prefer to be? In this upper point or in their downward posture when you don't exert any energy? They prefer to be downwards. Add to that healthy lung tissues have elastic connective tissue fibers holding them together. So like a balloon made of an elastic material, what does the balloon like to be? Inflated passively, or does it like to be in its passive state deflated? Likewise with your lungs. All right? And so your lungs prefer to be in the deflated state. In fact, if I penetrate the chest wall, all right, if I penetrate the chest wall, here's a big knife, all right? All right. If I penetrate the chest wall, now air can go in here, and I've just removed the vacuum that exists here. Guess what the lung does? It collapses. It becomes smaller than its normal state. All right. So there's always a slight negative pressure here that keeps the lungs slightly expanded, and when you inhale, it expands even further. All right. So that just demonstrates the elastic properties of the lung itself. All right. Unless you have emphysema, where the lung loses its elastic properties, all right? And as I'll tell you in a moment, if you have emphysema and the lung loses its elastic properties, then you don't exhale very passively, do you? You don't exhale easily, all right? And so what do you do if you have emphysema? You fill your lungs further so you can take advantage of what little elasticity they do, and it means you of your pulmonary volume, all right? You're breathing way up here, and people that have emphysema classically have what? Barrel chests, all right? Because they're breathing at the top end, trying to take advantage of what little elasticity there is when the lung is more fully inflated, all right? Not a good scenario, all right? Now, your lungs deflate passively then, all right? However, if you are active, if you're running, you want air, the turnover of air, you want your ventilation rate to be much faster than this simple, slow exhalation that occurs due to the passive recoil. All right? And so you have muscles that you can engage to pull the ribs downwards. Okay? And in pulling the ribs downwards, you're engaging a deeper set of muscles than the external intercostals. They run perpendicular to those, and can you imagine what happens when these muscle fibers contract? What happens? They pull the ribs down. All right? And if you pull the ribs down, the volume gets smaller. If the volume gets smaller, what happens to the pressure? It increases, all right, and you push the air out. All right? At the same time, as we said, the diaphragm, and you can even contract your abdominal muscles and actually push your digestive organs up against your diaphragm to move it upwards, okay? So you can do a forceful exhalation, all right? And that's the only way, especially as you get older, that you can successfully blow out your birthday candles, right? Because you can't just go, that doesn't work. You've got to forcefully exhale. All right? And if you're going to create a burst of air, right, you've got to do pulling that rib cage down, internal intercostals down, push that diaphragm up, or at least get the abdominal muscles involved in bringing that upwards. All right? Okay. Any questions? All right. So if we look at this figure here, it reiterates this idea of changes in volume, and it shows you that when you inhale, you change volume in all three directions. You lower the floor, you expand the thoracic cavity, you bring the thoracic cavity out. So you're getting wider, deeper, or deeper in this direction, and taller, if you will. All right, so you're expanding in three dimensions, and conversely, when you exhale, all those directions are going opposite. And you see it here. They're side to side. I'm becoming broader versus in the exhaling state. I'm bringing the bucket handle out, all right, so that my chest is becoming deeper, if you will, and the height of that cavity is shifting from very tall here to less so here in the case of exhalation. All right? Are we good? Okay. All right. A few quick comments on some pulmonary diseases. I've already talked about emphysema. Emphysema is a degeneration of the alveolar surfaces as well as the elasticity of the lungs. So you're losing respiratory surface area, you're losing the dynamic nature of the lungs in terms of their ability to inflate and deflate passively, or deflate passively, all right? And there are various causes here. The major cause is smoking, but exposure to other chemicals can also cause this degeneration. It is irreversible, and it is a progressive process, so it just gets worse with time, and it's a very sad way to die. All right, you can see evidence of that here as you look at a normal lung here, and then one that has emphysema, and you see that what's happened. The walls between the alveolar spaces have broken down, right? And as soon as you start losing walls, you're losing surface area, right? The fewer subdivisions that you have, the less surface area you have. Does that make sense? Okay. Asthma, as we've said, it's constriction of the bronchioli, all right, of the bronchioles. And as you constrict those, that limits airflow, all right? So when you're trying to ventilate your lungs, you're impairing the ability to move air into or out of the lungs, all right? And various things can bring about asthmatic conditions, including cold weather and vigorous exercise and stress, all right? And one of the things people use for relaxing the smooth musculature of the bronchioles is adrenaline, right? When somebody has anaphylactic shock, right? They're allergic to bee stings or something, to bee venom, all right? What happens? Two things happen when you have anaphylactic shock. One, your capillaries, you undergo vasodilation, right? What happens then? If you're vasodilating, you get your blood pressure goes down, right? Okay. And number two, you have bronchiolar constriction. So now you have low blood pressure, that is poor perfusion of blood through the lung, and you have poor ventilation, so you have your delivery of air into the lung is poor, and that combination means you barely are going to be exchanging gases, aren't you? All right? A shot of adrenaline. Does anybody carry one of those little epinephrine pens? Some people do, all right? People that have concerns about, bee stings or other things they might encounter that they're severely allergic to. All right, they get on the airplane, they eat the free peanuts, and then they die before takeoff. All right, right. Look, I'm telling you, I have an allergy to Brazil nuts. All right, if you ever want to do me in, that's the way. All right. Once my faculty colleagues all came over to my house, it was like our Christmas party or something, and somebody brought those little Mexican Christmas cookies. They look like a little golf ball with powdered sugar on them. And everybody came over, and I cooked a big ham, and everybody had a nice time, and they all left, and they left me with a big pile of dirty dishes, and I cleaned the dishes, and I sat down at the table. It's good, it's quiet, it's done. And I popped one of those puppies into my mouth, loaded with Brazil nuts. All right? And I mean, within minutes, everything was shutting down. All right? And I was like really pulling to get air into my lungs, took a Benadryl or something and just went and lied down and just tried to remain really calm. All right, and about 2 hours later, everything opened up again. It's amazing. All right, they were trying to do me in. All right, and I'm still here. All right, smoking, of course, is a very destructive process on the pulmonary tissues. All right. It anesthetizes the cilia. That's the least of it. All right. So your cilia are no longer beating. So you have that flow of mucus dripping down into the alveolar spaces. To compensate for that, you do your coughing, right? To expel that mucus, all right, to expel that mucus. In addition, over time, the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium is replaced with a stratified squamous epithelium, which is more resistant, but of course, a stratified squamous isn't going to move mucus for you, is it? All right, so you lose the benefits of that. all right? And it may lead to emphysema, and it could lead to bronchitis, that is inflammation of the bronchial tissues. It can lead to asthma, closing down those bronchioles, or it can lead to lung cancer, all right? And lung cancer is what? What brings on a cancer, all right? It is simply one of two things. I'll tell you two things, all right? One is that the chemical agents precipitate mutations, all right, in the cells that are dividing. And which cells divide typically? The epithelial cells, all right? The epithelial cells are your dividing cells there. So you get those chemical agents in the cigarette smoke, it's in those high concentrations and so forth, cause mutations, all right? Now I make a point of it. Obviously, 85% of lung cancers are due to smoking, and you begin to accumulate then genetic damage, all right? But I wanted to mention something that I thought you'd find interesting, which is asbestos, all right? Where we no longer put asbestos in buildings and classrooms and homes and things, all right? And of course, asbestos was a cancer-causing agent, all right? But it's interesting that it does not cause cancer by causing mutations, all right? That is, these chemicals are acting at the level of your DNA and damaging your DNA, all right? Asbestos doesn't. Instead, it's fibers that embed in the lung tissue and irritate the lung tissue so that your cells are constantly having to divide to repair themselves. And of course, every time cells divide, there's a tiny chance that a mutation will occur. And that's where it comes from in the case of asbestos. It is simply the chronic or the repeated, abnormal rate of cell division that's required to overcome the irritation of these little fibers that increases your chances. Your chances of a mutation occurring during cell division are about 1 in a million, all right? Well, if your cells are dividing enough times, all of a sudden you're up to that 1 in a million, your number comes up, okay? And that's how you generate it. And of course, cancer emerges from just one single cell that is then able to grow and proliferate, all right, and become a malignancy. All right, I'm going to stop the respiratory system there.